Thank you so much. So welcome everyone. And I'm going to, you probably saw me earlier in the Mediate BC, Julie Dom, chair of the board of directors for Mediate BC. And I am here to launch us. And I'd like to start with a welcome. So as a Wet'suwet'en woman, we address the people in the room, which are Deneza, male chiefs, Teketza, female chiefs, Skyza, children of chiefs, to all the humans and people who are attending from all over the lands where you come from. So welcome, thank you. And really my role here tonight is to introduce the co-chairs of this amazing event. I want us all to give a warm welcome and lots of gratitude to Sharon Sutherland and Darcy Meredith, who are joining me. I'm zooming in from the north central part of BC, from the traditional territory of the Stelletan people, and I will invite them to introduce themselves.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I'm going to say welcome to everyone. Welcome to the opening event of the Northwest Collaborative Futures Conference. Both Darcy and I are joining from the traditional and ancestral territories of the Tsawwassen people.
And thank you all for joining us here. We want to jump right in, but first we're going to give you a quick thank you to everyone from the 5 organizations that are all working together to put on this conference, the Northwest Collaborative Futures Conference. First off, a huge thank you to CLEBC. Not only are they one of the organizing partners, but I want to note that they are running the tech for this event and for the next 2 full days. So thank you very much, CLEBC. Our other organizing groups are Mediate BC, Mediate.com, Core Conflict Resolution Society, and WISBA ADR section, so the Washington State Bar Association ADR section. I want to say thank you to those 5 organizations and a huge thank you to our massive planning committee. There are too many people to name by names, but you know who you are. Thank you all.
And I'm gonna transition directly into introducing our speaker. But what I want to frame that a little bit. We're very, very excited to have Tamo Penikett here, and we have invited him to speak on a conference theme that is about deconstructing artificial borders, which is something that we spent a lot of time as a planning committee thinking about, talking about. Generating ideas about what does it mean to deconstruct artificial borders? What kinds of ways can we imagine that? And one of the things that was really forefront in our minds was that part of what we can deconstruct is the ways we think about who can teach us, where can we learn, how do we understand? The ideas that learning is in silos, academic disciplines, ways of practicing, and that's the only place we can learn, is really limiting around the way we think about our practice as conflict resolution professionals. And so one of the things that came up early in a brainstorming session was a discussion about the kinds of things that matter to us as conflict resolution professionals, the kinds of skills that we engage in, the kinds of work that we do, and recognizing that a really important part of what we do is really tied to storytelling, to understanding stories, to thinking about the ways that stories embody people's experiences in the world. And with that, it occurred to us that we really should think about bringing in somebody who's from a storytelling profession and tradition. And that's how we came to the idea of inviting Tamo to join us. We're incredibly excited to have him here. Many of you are going to recognize him primarily from work that you've seen him in things like Battlestar Galactica or Dollhouse, Altered Carbon, any number of different shows. Some of you may have been really lucky, luckier than me, and got to see Kira and the Girl at the Vancouver International Film Festival. I can't wait till that's in release somewhere. But there's many different things you might have seen him in. You may also, I've been hearing as we talked about him joining us from people in the community who've said, oh yeah, I heard him on Canada Reads, or I listened to him on one of the podcasts. And we've been hearing about people who have heard Tamo in other kind of more reflective spaces than specifically the work that he does as an actor. And so there's been a lot of excitement about him joining us here today. But we've asked him here also to just share his own thoughts, his own reflections, and his own and draw from his own personal experiences in talking about our theme, deconstructing artificial borders. We're going to hand it over to him to speak to you. And what we're going to do is encourage you, go ahead and use the chat. Fill it with your questions. He's not going to be watching the chat while he's talking. We'll come back and allow you to have a Q&A. You'll be able to raise hands, and we'll be able to look back to the chat. So don't lose your questions. Put them in the chat now, and we'll follow along and bring them to him when he's done. And now, Tamo, I'm going to welcome you and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That's a wonderful and flattering introduction. I'm very honored to be here. I want to start off by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from the ancestral lands, the unceded lands of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation here in North Vancouver. My name, as you've already heard, is Tahmoh Penikett. I am Dene on my mother's side from the White River First Nation in the Yukon Territory. And I'm English Welsh on my father's side. I just want to start by saying that I'm really honored to have been asked to share a little bit of my story with everyone here and my perspective. I'm a parent, I'm a teacher, a son, a nephew, and a father, most importantly. And at this stage of my life, I'm always trying to learn and grow through positive intention, education, and learning to listen better. I'm sure you've already discerned by my freckles, I'm a white passing Indigenous man. And this has afforded me many privileges in my life. But at the same time, it's also allowed me to be privy to the common racist stereotypes that many Canadians still hold, unfortunately. I realized from a young age that Canada, being Canadian, the opportunities, the benefits from living in one of the wealthiest countries in the world doesn't apply for most Indigenous, Inuit, or Métis in this country. And I'll speak more on that later. Growing up, English was the main language that was spoken in my household. But for the first 5 years of my education, I was actually in French immersion. And as much as I cherish the fact that when I travel, I'm not the same young man I used to be where I was embarrassed of using it. I've retained a lot of my French, and I've used it a lot traveling, and I'm grateful for that. But even as a kid, and even more so as an adult man, I was always left wanting that I was educated and taught my traditional language of Upper Canada. This is something I hope for the future with my children. It took me a very long time to understand why so many people in my family didn't speak our language, and why there seemed to be so much pain attached to my insistent questions about our people, our language, our ways. My mother really wanted to shield me from some of the truths that happened at residential school. But I was insistent. I was tireless in wanting to know, because I knew that harm had been done to my family, and especially to my mother, and that pained me, and I needed to understand. I wanted to know why the church did what it did, why the government did what it did. And with time, she started sharing a lot more with me as I got older, and I was of a better age to be able to understand it. Like the Tlingit say, I've walked two paths. I've passed through many worlds, many borders of nation, borders of class, languages, and ethnicity. Always, though, I've been able to navigate them to some degree. And maybe now I can say that perhaps I've actually become adept at going from one to the other with less friction than I experienced when I was a lot younger. I'll give you an example from my childhood. I'd be going from, my small town, northern Indigenous experience, one day to the next week flying out to the populated province of BC to see my British grandparents. I'd be out in the element in the Yukon with my family on the land, someone having just harvested a moose, we're skinning and packing the animal out. Everybody's working and talking, and there's stories being told, and aunties are laughing and teasing. And I'm doing something that our people have been doing for millennia in our traditional territories. And, you know, as a child, there's nothing I enjoyed more than spending that quality time with my family. You know, then the next day I'd be driven back to town, cleaned up, put on a plane and sent down to my British grandparents. And when I say cleaned up, it definitely wasn't up to my fastidious British grandmother's standards. The minute I arrived, I'd be shipped to Sears. We would go there and get some new clothes. There'd be a haircut. And then I'd be straight into manners school with my grandmother, you know, teaching me how to sit up straight, arms in, use my 3 forks properly, scooping away properly with a spoon, and of course, not speaking, because children are meant to be seen, not heard at the dinner table. And she would like to remind us when we got a little too frisky at the table and spoke too much. Now, I do appreciate the fact that I can be quite comfortable at a formal meal, correctly using my 3 forks and the spooning the soup, as I mentioned. But given the choice, I'm much more in my element and happier if I'm in the smokehouse with my family, enjoying some moose guts, listening to the laughing and teasing and the stories of my family. Now, as you probably gathered, as much as my Indigenous side is more familiar to me, I cherished my British grandparents. They were kind, intelligent, and good people. They were both barely adults when the Second World War started. Literally, I think my grandmother was just turning, no, she may have been 17. My grandfather lied about his age at 17 and enlisted in the RAF. And by 19, he was a flight sergeant. But for 6 years of their lives, you know, the horrors that they experienced, the fortitude that they had to have at such a young age, fighting such a clear enemy, will never not cease to amaze me and make me feel immensely proud and grateful for what they fought for and who they were. Being able to move between my Dene and British cultures is mostly a blessing. As a child, being able to be on the land in the Yukon one day with my grandmother, learning and listening about the old ways. And as I mentioned, the next week I could be with my father's parents, doing yard work, drinking tea and having biscuits, listening to my grandparents discuss world events or family affairs. I'm grateful that I could easily transition between both. But as I mentioned, coming from both of those worlds has given me a firsthand perspective of the inequity of Indigenous people's experience in Canada. Now, I'm grateful that I come from both worlds, but I also feel a responsibility to try and bridge these cultural gaps as much as I can as an artist through my medium of film. And I want to and need to do more at this stage of my life. My father and mother connected through some common values and principles, which almost all cultures share at some level if the will is there to find them. Now, those of you familiar with my father, who's actually speaking tomorrow, know that he is a social democrat to the core. This, coupled with my mother's strong activism with Indigenous political issues, made for a decent upbringing. Let's just say I have a good sense of right and wrong, and I have had since from a very young age, even as different as their 2 backgrounds and stories were. They instilled in me many good things, but most importantly, that the world, people, and nature are intrinsically connected. We have a reciprocal obligation to the sick and old, the young and healthy, human and non. And in these divisive times, I try to remember that when I'm listening to someone from a different background and opposite political spectrum than I am, when we're discussing a contentious topic. And I can tell you there's been a lot of those conversations, you know, having worked and lived in the United States for a long time. I've got a lot of friends who in the last few years have really expressed how they're on the opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to political points of view. And these are the times that we live in. So we have to find common ground. They're still my friends, but I try to listen better. Now, I think it's safe to say that I'm quite familiar with borders, maybe more than a lot of people in Canada, because of where my people are from and my chosen career. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Upper Canada on my mother's side, and I was mostly raised in the Yukon Territory, but most of our people are actually on the Alaskan side. Now, you have to remember, before the construction of the Alaska Highway, there was little contact that far north in the Yukon Territory. Of course, the Hudson's Bay Company had traders up there. There were some independent traders and the Russians at some points, but geographically, where we're situated, where our traditional territory is kind of like the farthest point. So there really wasn't a lot of contact. And that's hard for a lot of people to believe, considering when, colonial Europeans came to the other side of Canada, over 400 years ago. But you can imagine the surprise of my ancestors, my great-great-grandfather, when he's sitting in there out on his land, his traditional territory, minding his business, going about his ways. And some white men come stumbling through the woods in 1907 and tell him that there's going to be a line now, and that he has to now identify as Canadian or American, and that he won't be able to go across this imaginary line that they're talking about without their permission. I can only imagine that he and my family were surprised. They were confused. They probably were incensed that the audacity of this stumbling settler who's come with this life-changing news. And the audacity of this affront was not lost some 80 years later, when I passed through the Alaskan border as a child with my grandparents to see my family on that side. Now, most of the older and experienced border guards, they knew my grandmother. They respected her. They spoke to her with a lot of reverence, because they'd been there a long time and they understood the situation. They understood that our tribe was on both sides of the border, and they understood that my grandmother was a very well-respected matriarch, and they'd spoken to her and she commanded respect. She was an incredible woman. But I did experience more than a few times a young, overzealous new border guard speak to my grandmother disrespectfully and questioned her in a way that he shouldn't have, and with the wrong tone. And I do remember one time in particular where the guard did the standard questions where, where are you from, ma'am? And where do you think you're going? What business do you have in the United States of America? And my grandmother looked at him and she asked where one of the older agents was before a lengthy pause, which had everybody sweating. The young agent replied that he wasn't available and that he was handling the situation. So she looked him in the eye in the way that would make any man shiver. And she said, who in the hell are you to ask me what the hell I'm doing on my lands? Who in the hell do you think you are? Have you asked me permission to be on my lands? My grandfather would always laugh at these confrontations. He couldn't help it, because that was my grandmother. There was no calming her with these situations. These guys, seeing a older Indigenous women chew them out in that way, usually these young ones were always, they were cowed very quickly. They didn't know how to handle the situation. Luckily for everyone, one of the older agents would usually come and settle everything down. I miss that woman all the time. She was truly the matriarch for our family. She had a wonderful sense of humor, but she was a fierce woman and an amazing storyteller. Anyway, back to what I was saying. As much as this border has always been a hindrance, an effort by powers that be to separate and weaken our people, our families on both sides maintain their travel and connection as much as possible, knowing that to cease this travel completely would be devastating to the greater community. Most of the Upper Tanana are on the Alaskan side, as I said. Now, travel between the two sides is constant, and it's essential to the vitality of the family units, tradition, and maintaining cultural sides. This recent pandemic, of course, has been really challenging for our family and community members who haven't been able to travel across because of the restrictions. Family has passed, young and old, and the potlatch, arguably the single most important ceremony for keeping our traditions alive, has suffered the most. This important ceremony is where we honor and nurture family connections. We celebrate our loved ones who have passed on to the other side, and we mourn as one people through song, dance, and practice ceremony. You know, growing up in the Yukon when I was a kid, the idea of actualizing my dream of becoming an actor on the big screen seemed at most times unattainable. I would be lying if I didn't acknowledge that being a white passing Indigenous person didn't afford me more opportunities. But my story, being a child of two opposing cultures, I know informed my performances and helped me book some of my most important roles. One of my most important roles being Battlestar Galactica, the show that I'm probably most proud of. Now, that show was so ahead of its time. It was dealing with issues of war, genocide, insurgency, a president guided by God, suicide bombers, racism, and very much my storyline was about interracial marriage. The show set a precedent early on dealing with the most contentious issues that were happening in the world at the time, where a lot of shows, especially network shows, wouldn't go anywhere near. And I'm very proud that I was a part of that wonderful piece of art. I'm also very proud of the fact that, you know, that bravery from the writers and show creators to touch on these subjects and to speak on them. They also did it in a way that was really magical, because they were always true to showing both sides, both perspectives. And they managed to evoke from the audience that important human trait of empathy. And I can't tell you how many times I've been to conventions where I've met fans. They're always, you know, they'd always be about one side, you know, either the Cylons or the humans, but they get really heated and worked up about certain episodes. But when you'd have a real conversation with them, they'd always end up acknowledging that they did see some of the other side's point of view and understood their actions. And yeah, I've always enjoyed those interactions. Another thing that I'm really proud about with the show is that at the time, there was no show that had such a diverse cast. We had people of African descent, African American, Latino, Japanese, Korean, Jewish, and Indigenous. And it was definitely one of the most diverse shows on television at the time. And I know for a fact that it set a very real precedent for future cable shows. And it's part of the reason that streaming now is becoming a lot more diverse. As an actor, I'm constantly having to live different roles and characters. Injecting myself in different perspectives is part of my job. And it's definitely helped me to learn about different conflicts in the world and examine my own biases about certain issues and limited perspectives that I may have. One of the first lessons that many acting teachers will give you is you can't judge your character, the character you're playing. You need to understand why they do what they do and see the world from their eyes. And I think, you know, my background has definitely helped me with that in my work. And little did I know as a child that I would often be crossing the American border, but to the south. Having spent so many years working on the American side with some of the best in the business in Los Angeles, I've lived some of the artificial experiences that a working actor on a network show gets to do. You know, the parties, the glamorous people, the expensive corporate sponsored events. I can tell you though, you know, once that show is done and your stock is no longer hot, that can be the loneliest town in the world. And even when things were good and you're living in this bubble, it was impossible for me not to recognize the disparity between white and non, the clear hierarchy in the job place, the obvious class and economic distinctions, most on the lower end being of Latino and African-American descent. My first real low point in career is when I realized, with my mother's help, of course, that I needed to go home. It was time to be back in the land, to connect with my people and my culture, and remember my roots. And traveling once again from one border to the next. And I think that time I may have truly recognized how incredibly valuable that liberty was. Now, I've been a professional in this business for 20 years now. I've seen a lot of changes in that time. But what I'm most encouraged about is the recent movement by the industry to tell stories of visible minorities and the LGBTQ community. For the first time, there's a real desire from networks for Indigenous stories and Indigenous content. And I am so excited at some of the work that I've seen already. It is inspiring and exciting to see this stuff on the screen. The immense talent out there with Indigenous creatives is really, really inspiring. Selfishly, though, I can't wait to share some of my own writing and stories of my mother and our people, and to get them on the big screen. This appetite for stories is signaling a shift in perspective from non-Indigenous. Man, I believe this desire, this curiosity, and the art we're producing will play an important part in the healing that has to happen in this country. Now, as a parent, I'm so concerned about the future of our planet and the mess our children are inheriting. I think it's obvious to many that the Eurocentric way of doing so many very things has been an absolute failure. We have a real climate crisis, climate emergency on our hands. And I hope and I pray that moving forward, we start to embrace and learn as much as we can from the Indigenous knowledge keepers that are left. I mean, if there's hope for this planet, Indigenous elders, knowledge keepers need to be consulted at the very least in all important board, committee, and regulatory systems with regards to our environment. It has to be done. It's the way forward. My mother and all the survivors of residential schools were taught from day one that their culture, their language, their knowledge was useless, that it had nothing to offer, and that they should not only be ashamed of it, but not practice any of it if they were going to survive in this new world. The unfortunate truth is these dated and bigoted views of Indigenous people are still pervasive today. It's why you have police handcuffing a child and her grandfather at the Bank of Montreal in downtown Vancouver, a branch that he'd been a member of, a client of since 2014, simply for wanting to open a bank account. Now you have to wonder what kind of preconceived biases this bank clerk had and was taught from a young age. You know, it's why Indigenous women in this country are missing and murdered more than 10 times the national average. It's why you still hear racist names and tired stereotypes about First Nations in this country on the street, in schools, and in the workplace. It's why the government continues the destructive practices of the child welfare system in Canada, separating Indigenous youth from their families and communities and increasing their chances for substance abuse and suicide. It's why we still have 80 plus Indigenous communities in Canada, one of the wealthiest and most resource-rich countries on the planet. 80 communities with no clean drinking water. It's astounding. We have so much work to do moving forward. Now, those of you listening, if you're not an Indigenous person and you were horrified by the discovery of the graves of the hundreds of children in Kamloops, and then the continued discovery of more graves at residential schools across the country, then you need to demand change. Start with educating yourself, then your children, then your partner, your household, then your family and your greater community. Read the Truth and Reconciliation's 94 calls to action. Learn which nations, unceded lands you reside on. Ask that our education system tell our truths. Teach the children young that First Nation people and their respective cultures are to be respected and acknowledged. We have to start them young. It's the only way. You know, speaking of Indigenous knowledge, my mother's told me many a times where she's been, she was watching the TV with my grandmother and some scientist or biologist was being lauded for his recent discovery about migrating caribou or wolves. And my grandmother would just turn and look to her and, you know, well, I knew that. We've always known that. Why didn't they ask me? You know, there's so many examples of this. My grandmother would do this often. You know, I can tell you that most of the conservation officers in the in the Yukon didn't really want to have too many conversations, too in-depth conversations with my grandmother when it came to anything about nature and the environment and the animals, because she knew more than they would ever learn in a lifetime. You know, recently, another example, recently scientists have discovered that trees and all plant life are interconnected, that everything is affected by each other, and there's complex networks of communication, and they're working together for their shared survival and growth. You know, again, this is Indigenous knowledge across the board. That had this Indigenous knowledge been respected and listened to early on, we may well, you know, have prevented us from being in the climate crisis that we are in now. And whether you realize it or not, these barriers, these borders of poisonous stereotypes about Indigenous needs to be addressed at the grade school level if we're truly going to combat racism in this country. This is something that immediately needs to be addressed. Indigenous knowledge has been attained over thousands of years of working symbiotically with the land, the water, the plants and animals. Moving forward, we need to bridge this border of ignorance that maintains the same destructive Eurocentric practice and systems. We need to embrace the rich knowledge of Indigenous stewardship about these lands that we live on. Let us truly try to be an example for other nations by embracing the First Peoples, learning from and celebrating them. I think developing a Native curriculum with a focus on the physical environment and all living things in it is a first step. Further than that, you know, we should be facilitating university courses and degrees in Indigenous languages. I have hope for the future. You know, I have to be an optimist. I'm a father. And I have a real hope that we can break down these barriers of race and misconceptions. We can work together towards a shared, sustainable, and prosperous future for our children. Briefly, for those people out there who have doubt about us working hand in hand, you know, I'm very proud of what my father's government achieved when they were in government. Framing the first umbrella agreement with almost all the First Nations in the Yukon. Ironically, not ours, but that's a longer story. This land claim and ability, this would provide those First Nations land claim and the ability to self-govern, and would have settler communities working together with Indigenous hand in hand. And it would give these nations ultimately the power over education, lands, resources, and even child welfare. There's a long way to go, obviously. It's something that'll take a lot of work, but these promising initial steps could be the model for the rest of the country moving forward about successfully working together. As I mentioned, I have to be an optimist. It's a tumultuous world, but I do hope for a future where my children know and celebrate their diverse backgrounds and cultures and can proudly speak their language and carry on our rich traditions and beliefs, not limited by the grievances of the past, instead moving forward with focus, respect, and equality. Finally, I want to send a healing prayer to all of those affected by the devastating news of the children's graves. This has triggered many, many survivors and their families, and I urge provincial and the federal government to address this trauma immediately, and at the very least with funding for healing centers. Anyway, thank you so much. Sanicho.
Thank you so much. And Wet'suwet'en we say, or Dakar Masicho.
Sure.
It's Natalia. is Wet'suwet'en, and I really just connected the dots as a Dene man. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Sunny.
Such powerful stories, and I wanted to the thing that grabbed me a lot. There's so much there, and like you, as a white passing Indigenous person, I feel an immense responsibility to my Wet'suwet'en people to educate and help people understand. And as a consumer of art, and I also have a couple of children who are artists in different mediums, I'm always awed by the power of art to cut through the other things, right? Like, and I learned when I started teaching was that we have to reach people's hearts before we can reach their brains, and that it's a shortcut into building understanding and creating empathy and compassion and understanding. And I'm just curious about, you talked about your responsibility as a Dene person. And now you have a role as, you know, a storyteller, as an artist. Can you talk a little bit about how those overlap, or your purpose, or how you see that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you made all the points right there. You know, not only as an artist do I have a responsibility to speak on issues that are important to me and that are very pressing right now, but you know, I bring it back to being a parent. The urgency with which I need to contribute in a positive way, in an educational way, is just that much more pressing. We are at a real crossroads in this country and in the world, but let's keep it specific to Canada right now. The only way we move forward is if the truth of Indigenous realities and the experience, residential schools, and the relationship with the Canadian government is told. It has to be put in the education system. The only way that we are going to combat this pervasive, aggressive, poisonous, and dated vitriol and stereotypes about Indigenous people is by educating them firsthand and connecting to them, like you said, through their heart. You know, you connect to people by the heart. The reason that the medium of film is loved throughout the planet, regardless of culture, is because we see someone's story on screen, and when we hear someone tell a story, what we do is we immediately think of our own story and how it relates to that. If somebody's talking about losing a loved one, we immediately think about a loved one that we've lost. We have to evoke that in people, and I think that happened with the discovery of the graves. I think so many Canadians, I had so many non-Indigenous friends of mine reach out. I was fielding massive amounts of texts. Tamo, oh my God, I heard you talk about this before, but I didn't realize this is amazing. People were horrified. The biggest crime here is that they had no knowledge of this. It wasn't taught in school. I'm not an old man, I'm only 46. I remember in social studies, we had one brief effing chapter on residential school, which infuriated me as a child. I used to have so much anger about it. I'm like, why is this not told? I'd hear my white friends, not close friends, ones I didn't remain friends with. But again, I always understood that some of the vitriol that they spit, they learned from their family. They heard their dad saying it. They heard their older brother saying it. Why did they have these attitudes? Why were people so quick to pass, say, a drunk man on the street and just automatically assume that everyone is this? Did they even take a second to see that person as a human being and understand, or try and consider that this person might have suffered extreme trauma? Back to all these friends, everyone's reaching out. They want to know more. They want to get educated. I'm encouraged by that. My friends, most of us are parents now. All these non-Indigenous friends, they want to do their part. They want to be part of it. It's hard, but they've got to demand more. They can't just read a little bit, but you know, it starts in the household and they have to do that. So again, going back to it, these issues have always been important to me. It's never ceased to amaze me when I bring them up and I tell people about residential school. People are like, wow, your mother went there? And it astounded me that it was never addressed in the education system. It's truly a crime. All these things that Canada's claim that it is, you know, they're not true. That said, I don't want to be too negative about this. There is hope for this nation. It can achieve some of the things that it claims to be and it hopes to be. But it can't do that until we hear our truths, until people are educated about the Indigenous truths, the history of Canada, all 400 plus years of it. And like I'm talking about, the whole continent from when the first time the colonizers arrived, until that's instituted at a grade school level. And people, by doing that with children are not born racist. They're blind to color. They're the most beautiful things in the world. If you go to a park and you watch children play, it's not in them. They learn this from their families. If we can address this at an early level in our education system, I have so much hope for the future generations. They'll know better. They'll be armed with the intelligence, the knowledge that doesn't matter what they hear at home, it's wrong, and I know better. And I have sympathy and I have empathy for these people, and I understand their story. And I'm a settler and I live on their traditional lands, and I celebrate them and their culture and everything that they've gone through. And that will make for a Canada that everyone always claims is and isn't right now. And as a parent, I have a strong duty and responsibility to do my part to educate as many people as I can, because having just conversations about it, growing up and often getting into arguments about it, is exhausting and not a way to affect the masses. So through my medium, I have to do that. And I'm going to do that by telling my own stories of my people and my mother's story at residential school and share those films. And I applaud and I encourage all the Indigenous creators out there, because I know they're motivated and I know they're excited right now. And I'm excited for you. Work hard. The industry is embracing this now. Celebrate your stories, share them with the world, because the world wants to hear right now. People do want to learn and they want to know, as painful as it's going to be.
So great. And I see one of the comments is like, support the Indigenous arts, right? With your wallet, with your presence at films, plays, books, stories. And I see in the comments a lot of gratitude to you for sharing your storyteller, your story. And I was just reading, you are a great storyteller. When can we expect to see a book co-authored with your dad?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, my dad is the writer. He's a fantastic writer. He's obviously been published many, many different times on many different subjects. I'm incredibly proud of my father. The work that he's done with First Nations in this country, the work they did while they were in government with the Umbrella Agreement, his continued work. I mean, his last book, Hunting the Northern Character, it's a fascinating book. I encourage anybody out there to get it if you really want to understand a lot of the Northern experience and Northern perspective and all the issues that are attached to that, and moving forward with this nation and everyone in the world, really. I'd love to work with my father on a project, and I've got some ideas, and he actually has some ideas too that we've recently been discussing. But when they get more real to coming to fruition, we'll share it. We'll share it with the world.
That's exciting. Thank you for teasing us with that.
Yeah.
And I think there was another question on, and yes, so much gratitude in the comments, and a question about sense of belonging. So did being a white passing male, did you ever struggle with a sense of identity conflict or a sense of belonging?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the irony is, and I don't like speaking about it a lot because, again, my situation was so much better than my family, my blood, who weren't white passing. Even my beautiful sisters have gorgeous dark skin. They didn't have the same experiences I did. Whenever we go to the Alaskan side, and I'd see my family in Northway and Mentasta and Tenecross and things like that, I had a tough time, man. I had to fight. I had to defend myself. You get this little white freckly kid running around the village. I had a tough time. I used to hate my skin. Funny enough, if you can imagine that, I didn't like that I was so pale. I hated it. I always wished that my skin was darker, just a little bit even, because I felt that I would have been more accepted by, a lot of my distant family from the American side. That said, my family was fiercely proud of me, and they never made me feel like I was anything but a proud Indigenous little white Indian. They just didn't. They protected me, and even when I get in those situations over there, sometimes I'd have a cousin or an uncle or whatever come to my protection, and sometimes it was because some of these kids didn't realize who I was. They didn't realize that I actually belonged there. And when they did, I got a little bit, begrudgingly got a little bit more respect. But it was tough for me. It was tough. Many different times when I was younger. I was always wanting to feel like and I did, again, I felt like I belonged. My family never made me feel like I didn't, but there was no hiding the fact that I was a little white freckly kid.
I only laugh because of the same experience. I'd be in the potlatch or in the batlats, and the grannies would be like, Annie, Annie, and they wanted to like pinch my skin, feel my hair. And was I real? Was I real?
That's funny.
I'm just looking for other questions. If I missed any, Sharon, do you want to?
Yeah, I appreciate you doing this, because I'm not really having. There's so many comments. I'm definitely going to get to them and read them all, but I'm not having time to sort of field them while we answer some of them.
Well, I think one that maybe just picks up on things you were already talking about. There have been a few questions that kind of circle around recommendations you have, and I noticed Mark in particular identified it as Julie, and I'm going to just say this because this is good information. Julie does amazing recommendations every so often. She goes on Instagram Live and talks about the Indigenous authors we should read.
Oh, beautiful.
She talks about the Indigenous films we should see. And so I'm wondering if you can maybe give us some ideas about who should we be watching for? Where are stories that we might be missing that we should be engaging with?
Yeah, well, what I really do is, if you go on Twitter, I've got a list of shows that I need to watch from new young Indigenous creatives who've got films coming out. The problem is some of these things are still at the festival level, but some of the bigger things that you've actually got on television, even network television. I mean, most recently, something that was getting a lot of recognition was Reservoir Dogs. I haven't seen it yet, but I can't wait to see it. I'm missing the name right now. It's literally the first Indigenous sitcom. Rutherford Falls, is that
Rutherford Falls, yeah.
There you go. Did you see it?
I've watched a couple episodes, and I've watched a couple episodes of Res Dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant, or what?
It is the best. Like, everybody can see themselves in it. I know the second episode is because my daughter works as a receptionist at the health center, and the second episode is about it. And she just got dragged relentlessly.
Yeah, I can't wait. It makes me so proud. I unfortunately haven't been able to see them yet, but I know people who are involved. Like, I'm a big fan of Michael Grey Eyes. What a wonderful actor. And I know the lead actress. She's actually like pretty much the showrunner. She's the creator. She wrote the show. This is amazing. Our stories are being celebrated. There's so much talent out there. What I would say to that person who was asking, just get on Twitter, be active, seek out the Indigenous projects that are coming out. So many of them are coming out just now. This recent acceptance of this promotion by the industries, by networks, for Indigenous content, it's new. It's very new. It's really been happening in the last few years, and you're going to see so much more in the next while. And I'm excited about it. I'm working on a number of different projects with some other Indigenous creatives, and I can't wait to be able to announce it when it's time. But yeah, just make the effort, seek them out, hear the stories, and I promise you're going to be. We're in this country in particular, but North America, we're in for years of incredible storytelling from all the rich, diverse nations in this continent. It's going to be fantastic. I'm so excited at it. The idea of it, the prospect of seeing it regularly, having access to it, seeing on the big screen, films and television series. It's all so exciting. It
changes the way we think when we engage with other stories. I'm just noticing that Christina has added Night Raiders to the list, and I know both Julie and I have watched it. Recently, it came out on Vancouver International Film Festival, and is now in play. So I'll draw other people's attention to that in the chat.
Yeah, it's you mentioned Kiri and the Girl, which is at VIF. I haven't seen it yet. He did give me the code to watch it, and I actually went. My partner and I, we just gotten off the plane, and we rushed down. We got ready. We had my grandmother taking care of the little ones, and we rushed down for this event. We realized when we got there that we'd screwed up on the time, and I had to work the next day, so I missed the premiere.
Well,
What did you think of the film?
We tried to catch it playing at other film festivals, but it's geo-blocked.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's another one that people, at least if you're in the BC area or Vancouver, you can access that right now. Yeah.
I have a question on the other side. So you feel a responsibility as a Dene man in the mainstream and in the especially the art world in TV and film. What do you have a storytelling responsibility in your culture?
My grandmother was a great storyteller. There was a festival that's still going on to this day, which I'm so proud to say that my cousin has organized many different times, my younger cousin. But my grandmother was a guest at the storytelling festival for many years. My grandmother had very broken English, and this goes back to the fact that there was little settler contact. She didn't have to go to residential school. She lived on the land, very traditionally until her later years, as did my great grandfather, as did most of my family from that generation. But even in her broken English, man, she was always one of the favorites at the storytelling festivals, and I feel a responsibility to carry that on. She loved telling stories to children, Indigenous and non, and that's usually what was at these festivals. There were kids from all different backgrounds, and they loved hearing her talk and speak, and I miss her all the time. And I try and think of her and her spirit and her energy, and that she's helped me go in this direction for a reason. She's given me guidance. There's been many points where I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, and I've gotten signs from her. She's come to me and reminded me that this is what I'm supposed to do. So, I want to continue that tradition because it is important in our culture. And to be honest with you, as many Indigenous nations in this country, right now we're fighting a losing battle to retain whatever is left. So many of the elders have passed because of the trauma that happened with residential school. Those generations have had their own issues with even trying to relearn much of the knowledge that their parents, their aunties, their uncles, their grandparents wanted to share with them. It's too traumatic. They were just trying to survive the harms, the grievances, the trauma that they went through in residential school. A few short generations, man. It is astounding to think how effective this practice form of cultural genocide is. It was decimated so much knowledge, so much intelligence, and we're really grappling in my small community. There's only so many Upper Tanana native speakers. There's a handful, of course, still on the American side. They're there, but even with today's technology, we're finding a really hard time preserving it. More than that, just allowing or facilitating a way for the children and people from my generation to speak more of it. As a kid, I knew lots of places and nouns and things like that in my language, but there's no way I could have a conversation. And again, it's a greater, longer conversation that we don't really have the time to delve into because it's long, and I don't think there's any one answer about it. But I was always left wanting. I wanted to learn it as a kid, but for many different reasons, my family wouldn't teach me. They couldn't, and that's really sad. I'm involved with a language revitalization group within my community, or within my band, and we're trying to preserve Northern Shoshone and Upper Tanana, which are the two languages within our nation, and we're doing everything we can right now. Things were slow during COVID for the last 2 years, but we're heading back to it, and with renewed vigor and focus, because more elders have passed in the last couple of years, and we're losing more knowledge, more language all the time. So it's a battle that's very important. Yeah.
Yeah, that COVID has been devastating to our community. We lost 2 of our matriarchs this year to it, and they were active in teaching right up until they passed.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. It's incredible, the loss, the damage, the hole that is left in a community when our matriarchs pass. It's my grandmother, when she passed, everything changed in our community. Everything changed, and not for the better. And I think it took years for things to start to mend and get back to even a tiny semblance of the way it was before. You cannot put value on these people. It's immense. They are everything, and they're passing very quickly, and we all need to work aggressively towards recording whatever we can, and hearing their stories, and learning whatever they're willing to share with us, so that we can pass it on in subsequent generations and keep those stories alive.
Thank you. There's a comment from somebody who said they grew up in the north. I can't read I don't know why my box is too small to read the name. They were your former Whitehorse Elementary School social dance partner.
Oh wow, my social dance partner. Okay.
Is it Ifni LaChance? Am I saying that right?
Sorry, what's the first name?
Ifni, IFNY.
Tiffany. Yeah. Is that supposed to be Tiffany? Tiffany LaChance? That really rings a bell. Hi, Tiffany. I miss dancing with you. Thanks for coming in. Where are you now? LaChance, what did you write? Greeting panelists and essential. Okay, nations break leg tonight. Well, I'm not seeing this message, but anyway.
Okay, can you speak further about the relationship between assimilation and being invisibilized or othered? And also interested in your thoughts on the social construction of borders. And there's another question in there too, but those are pretty big ones.
Sorry, what was the first part of the question?
The first part was, can you speak further about the relationship between assimilation and being invisibilized or othered?
Well, I mean, if I'm understanding the question, I mean, assimilation was, forced in this country, and it was aggressive, and specifically through residential schools, they tried to exterminate all of our rich knowledge and culture, and our intelligence, our great intelligence, and they weren't successful completely. They weren't successful completely, and I look at some of the new generations of Indigenous youth and students, and how active they are on social media, and how well educated they are, and how fiercely proud of who they are, and how they're practicing their customs and their culture, and they're speaking their language, and they're donning their regalia, and they're some of them are, I see some of the beautiful tattoos from some of the Inuit. I celebrate all of that. I think it's just incredible. I think a lot of these kids, a lot of this younger generation, they've got the fight in them. They're at that age and stage where they're willing to do everything that's required to preserve what's left of their culture, and to celebrate it moving forward, and to teach their kids, and to keep it alive, and to tell their stories. And I'm excited about that. Assimilation is inevitable in so many ways, but I truly believe, moving forward, that that this nation of Canada can at some time in the future, be a nation. Hopefully, if we do the hard work, if we go through it together, we can be an example for many other nations. I was really surprised when I went to New Zealand years ago, and just in passing conversation and meeting people there, it was my very first time there, how much they celebrated their Maori. It was amazing. There were so many non-Maori were married in, but the children spoke the language. They had the traditional tattoos. The art was everywhere. They celebrated, they spoke it. There's customs, you see it in the sporting events, all this stuff. And I was like, wow, this is amazing, because I don't see this back home, not at this level. I feel like they're a few steps ahead of us. Maybe they've gone through the healing more than us. And I'm not educated enough to know the situation there, and whether they've done that hard work. But it appeared to me that was the case, and it really gave me hope. It excited me. I was like, wow, that's the future Canada that I want to see. I want to see non-Indigenous kids celebrating the beautiful knowledge and traditions and song and dance and language of the people whose lands they reside on. I think that would be fantastic. Kids love that stuff. They're fascinated by it. And I see that in the future. I truly feel that can be the case. And I know there's a lot of provinces, there's a lot of places that are now doing that. They're acknowledging the unceded lands, the ancestral lands of the nations with which they reside. They're learning more about them, but we gotta work so much more. We have to do more of it. I want this nation to celebrate it. You want to be at the forefront. There was a common thing with the government of Canada was talking about our Indigenous and our First Nation. Well, you can't do that. You don't have the right to do that. But there can be a collaboration. There can be a work together, a celebration of the Indigenous peoples, the First Nations peoples in this country by non-Indigenous. And there will be hopefully a unity and shared love and respect moving forward if we do the hard work. And we just have to hear those truths, and we have to do the healing together, and then we have to move forward.
On those beautiful dreams, which I share wholeheartedly, I just want to thank you so much for your time and your story, your personal story, and the work that you've done and the sense of responsibility you have. It was communicated really beautifully. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And good luck for the rest of the webinar and tomorrow. And I look forward to hearing my father speak. And I celebrate you guys and what you're doing. We need more mediators in the world. There's never been a time where your work's been more important. So I celebrate you guys, and I encourage you to keep going. You have incredibly hard work, but it's very powerful work, and it speaks volumes about your skills and who you are as people to do this kind of work. So thank you, Sunny.
Awesome. And on that note, I think Sharon wants to talk about the rest of the conference a little bit before we lose everyone.
Well, I mean, I don't want to turn it into this crass thing, but I do want to make sure people who are joining us know that if you haven't registered for the conference, you still can. There's still opportunity to do that. And really, really welcome everybody to come and join us and continue this conversation. I fully support everything Julie said. This was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to open a conversation. And I look forward to us having the opportunity to speak deeply about the topics that have been raised here today throughout the next couple of days. And I'm incredibly grateful to you for sharing your story. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I just want Vic is putting in the chat how to find things for the conference, but I also want to just draw your attention, Tamo, to the number of people putting really very, very kind thank yous and very, very kind notes in the chat of just thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to read every single one of them. So you guys can mute my video or take me off screen. I've got to read these.